Hello, how are you? So we already did the idle chit chat stuff. So I'm just gonna kind of move on. This has been a very interesting week. We have a lot of Senate bills over here we're trying to keep track of and make sure we keep those moving. Our main focus right now is figuring out what's going to happen with the budgets. You know, Gary's got his working, and we want to see where we land with everybody else. We brought with me today is Representative Short, and she can talk to you about the climate change issue with Doug Erickson. Senator Erickson he's here right now, and the hearing in his committee last night, which I guess was very entertaining to all. And then I have jt-wilcox with me to talk about budget tidbits if you'd like. And Senator Parlett, you want to introduce your team?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So I'm Linda Parlett, the caucus chair for the Majority Coalition. I have Senator John Smith, and I also have Senator Doug Erickson. And same thing for us. We're kind of working on the budgets behind the scene, have to be up front. You know, we are missing our colleague, Senator Mike Carroll, who is awaiting a bone marrow transplant. He has a pre-leukemia condition. I have talked to him several times, and he's staying home at the moment where he can be healthy. And I'm happy to have these two fellows here.
Hi, Eric.
Okay, you can start now.
You pull, you don't push.
You're ready.
You know, it's interesting. I will want to add to this. Our thoughts and prayers are with Senator Carroll. You know, remember when we were in the tie?
I do.
And we had some Democrat members that were sick, and I do remember a couple instances where Clyde would turn to me and say, Richard, you're voting today with the Democrats to take the place of, and at the time it was Jeannie Edwards and other members that have been sick in the past.
Representative Hatfield's wife.
I remember taking those. And so as you do this, I'm hopefully pleased to understand that we will keep the decorum available, because even in Senate Rule, I think it's Senate Rule 22, it states that it is allowed for someone to actually vote for a member of the majority party who is sick or ill. And it's such a custom that it's created in rule, so I hope you're getting that kind of support. And you're in our thoughts and prayers in the House.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator, do you guys have a time frame on the budget at this point?
Whenever you see it. But
Soon.
no, but with Easter coming, and if you recall last year, we worked, Ways and Means Committee worked last year on Good Friday, probably till about 8:30. All of the members who didn't sit on Ways and Means were waiting. And then when we got on the floor, the majority party said, we're not going to work tonight. That was rather upsetting since we kept all our members along. So I can assure you we're aware that it's Holy Week, and we are hoping not to be working for sure on Friday afternoon. So I would assume next week.
Okay.
And do you have any assurances that Democrats might lend a vote in Mike Carroll's absence?
I'm not sure about that. It may depend on the issue, but I hope they, I just will hope that they will join us if there is a close vote, because I know that we would do the same for them.
Do you think it jeopardizes the majority coalition's majority position?
Well, I think it's made us more mindful of the difference between having 24 people sitting there and 25 people sitting there. But again, Representative DeBolt and I were elected the same year. We came in as freshmen for 2 years, then we had the 49-49 split, and we both remember this as clear as day when we had members seriously ill or in need of treatment. So I just think that's the professional thing to do, and I honestly can't believe anybody not doing that, no matter which side of the aisle they're on.
It's been a good tradition. We'd like to keep it going.
Do you think that the incident of a couple of weeks ago has changed anything? Raised consciousness, perhaps?
What's the incident?
I would say it has. Well, Senator Holmquist with right.
You would hope it has.
I'll throw something out at Senator Erickson.
Maybe they get
You
to speak
have
first,
the-
do they?
Or does someone else have to?
Oh,
No.
so-
Do you have anything you want to start on? Just little introductory things? Excuse me for interrupting you,
Sorry, no,
but
I didn't.
right. Do you want to? Well, normally you just give a little.
Normally we have each person do like a minute intro about themselves.
Yeah,
and-
what you've been doing
And
and.
so we'll start with Shelley, and then John, we'll put you first on
Sure.
the list.
Sounds fair.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No
No,
problem.
no, actually, we got sidetracked for a change.
You bet we did.
Thank you for bringing that back.
Yeah.
I'm serving my fifth session in the legislature. I was first elected in 2008 and served my first session in '09. I represent the 7th Legislative District, the largest geographic district in the state.
Used to be.
Used to be. Used to be.
I
Thank you,
represent the
Senator.
largest now.
Serve as ranking member on the Environment Committee, used to be Ecology and Parks. And of course, I was the lead in helping defeat Governor Gregoire's then cap and trade bill in 2009. That was an issue I took on as a freshman. And the other committees I sit on are labor and workforce development and healthcare. So I think it's a great fit for the district.
Anything in environment you want to talk about this week?
No, we've just, obviously, we had debate on the floor with the governor's, climate work group bill, supported that effort. I think, anytime we can gain more information and understanding what other states and other provinces are doing is a good thing. The devil will be in the details in the work group, but look forward to that effort.
Doug, you want to add to that? Tell them about you.
On the government
Just
bill?
introduce yourself while you're here. What you want to talk about?
You bet. You had Doug Erickson. I'm the state senator from Whatcom County and chair of the Senate Energy, Environment, and Telecommunications Committee. Happy to talk about the things we're doing in the Environment Committee this year, which I think are very exciting out of the Senate, making some fundamental changes. I think one of the most misunderstood bills to date this year in Olympia is that climate bill for the governor that we passed out. I'm not sure if people have all read it yet, even though it's going to the governor's desk. I'm also really excited about what we're doing to transform the MACA program in Washington State, the Model Toxic Control Act, to actually fund projects and clean up sites throughout Washington State instead of transferring the money to the operating budget or growing the Department of Ecology operating budget. So I think that's exciting for the people of Washington. And I'm also very excited about what we're doing on higher ed, with regards to finally turning the tide on cuts to higher ed and transitioning to the 10% increase in higher ed spending, a 3% reduction in tuition, and $50 million more for STEM. So happy to talk about those things in more detail also.
JT?
I'm jt-wilcox. I've met most of you. I represent the 2nd District, which is small town eastern Pierce and Thurston counties. My committees are just tax and spend, finance and appropriations, assistant ranking on appropriations, and floor leader. And I would say in the finance and approps world right now, we're waiting to see what the governor is going to release. We hear that he's going to be releasing some principles tomorrow. Interested in how he's going to live up to his no new taxes pledge from the election. And our budget priorities haven't changed. K-12, as the Constitution says, safety net for the most vulnerable, and public safety.
Senator Smith?
So I'm Senator John Smith from the 7th District, so that makes me Shelly-Short's seatmate. This is my first session. I serve right now as the vice chair of Natural Resources and Parks and the vice chair of Trade and Economic Development, and I also sit on the Transportation Committee. I believe that for my district, just like the rest of the state, the #1 issue, period, is jobs in the economy. We have people who have the skills to innovate and excel, and I think we need to come to a place where we stop trying to micromanage our entrepreneurs and we begin to give them the opportunity to get this economy back on track.
John?
Two related questions for Senator Erickson. One, you just said climate change is the most misunderstood bill. I wanted to see if I could get you to elaborate on that. And two, you had the Western Washington University scientist in your committee for about an hour plus yesterday. Since the bill was already passed, why bring the guy in?
Well, first off, on the climate change bill, it's not really a climate change bill anymore. It's really a cost-benefit analysis of environmental actions bill. And it's exciting because we're going to be taking a look at issues we haven't looked at before legislatively. What's the actual cost of these environmental programs on manufacturing, on agriculture, on fuel prices, the cost of a family's heating bill? All are required to be examined by the study that we're going out to with the consultant. We'll have to answer the question, even if we do meet the 1990 goals for carbon reduction, what does that actually mean worldwide? So the consultant has to come back with an answer on that. And the consultant also has to go through and prioritize what are the most, if you want to reduce carbon, the most cost-effective ways to go through and reduce, a ton of carbon out of production in Washington State. So I think it's an exciting bill that will provide the legislature with information they haven't gotten before, in a whole different format. So I think it'll actually lead us to the point of asking the question, is going back to trying to obtain this goal of 1990 standards the most cost-effective way to improve the environment? So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that some people are trying to say that this is just a committee to go and say, do I do cap and trade or do I do carbon tax? I think if you look at the bill, it actually takes you away from that to a much more comprehensive view of environmental protections in general in Washington State. I say it's a mechanism to take the religion out of carbon and just focus in on the numbers of how we can improve the environment.
Do you think it could actually be a vehicle to amend or repeal 937?
I don't know if you have to repeal it. It could be a mechanism to come back and say, what's the most cost-effective way to accomplish the goals we have out there? Is wind power a more cost-effective way to reduce a ton of carbon, or is conservation?
But
a more cost-effective way?
937 is not about climate. It's about building and propping up a wind industry. It wasn't about anything else. There is no measurable goals in 937 towards emissions.
Could it augment an argument to roll back the
Sorry.
goal of hitting the 1990 levels if, say, the report comes back and shows that it won't have a appreciable impact on worldwide?
Well, exactly. If it has no impact and you're simply going to punish the citizens of Washington State, what's the purpose of doing that? If we're already a very low carbon producing state on a per capita basis because of our reliance on hydro and nuclear power. And so I think it really turns the game on its head in terms of what we're trying to get done environmentally. And I think, as I talked about Governor Inslee, I think we share a common goal, and most of us up here do, I think all of us do, of improving our environment. He might believe it's through the carbon crusade. I might believe it's through different environmental ways of going at it, but now we have a nonpartisan report going to come back that says what is the actual cost per ton, what's the most cost-effective way to go about environmental protections. I think that's really what the bill does, and I think that's why it's an exciting one to get out of the legislature.
What's the potential impact of that on the coal ports and the coal trains as they come through Washington State?
I don't think this bill will have any impact on that, but it is an ironic side note to it, I think, as you think about that, but I don't think I have any impact on the coal.
What about county hydro as a renewable resource? Do you think it could have an impact on that?
No, it could potentially, as we take a look at 937 in general, but as Representative Bolt pointed out, 937 is about wind, and we're going to get a result back of, for a windmill, for the amount of money we spend on that, what's my net carbon reduction? Is that low-hanging fruit, or is that a very expensive way to reduce a ton of carbon out of the atmosphere by going to wind?
Shelley?
I don't want to.
I just want to see if Shelley had anything that, since she's got it in the house.
I think the biggest thing that I've seen with the things that I like about the governor's bill and the way it was amended in the Senate is we've continued to ask those questions repeatedly about, what does it cost? What are the benefits? What are the, industries that are affected? Are we trading one economy, a new economy and taking away from the old one? And so I'm excited about the work that's going to be done on this. I'm excited that it's independent. I'm excited that I was initially concerned with the governor's bill, having had him choose, the consultant and all of these things. I like what the Senate did. I think it's going to be a more pragmatic approach to getting something, as Doug said, was just little bit less biased, little bit more unbiased. But if you look at the WCI, the Western Climate Initiative, all of those things, states and provinces have markedly changed their direction. And so I think this bill is very timely to look at what's been done, what's maybe, have provinces or states gone away from in looking at carbon reduction. So I think this is very timely.
Why bring in, again, yesterday you brought in the professor who didn't buy into the global warming. Why bring them in after the bill was passed? What's the purpose or use of doing that?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, in the Senate Energy, Environment, and Telecommunications Committee, we're dedicated to open discussion and transparency and to let all viewpoints come forward. We brought in Governor Inslee for an hour of conversation about his bill and basically turned the committee over to him to talk and answer questions from the committee, which was great. I really enjoyed that. But it's been an ongoing discussion and debate about how we move Washington State forward on environmental issues. And I think the committee needs to be exposed to all viewpoints to understand there is a difference of opinion going forward. So I don't think it was directly related to the governor's bill, particularly the governor's bill as we pass it out of the Senate, pass it out of the House, and is going to his desk for signature. So I think it was a good conversation all the way around. And it went longer, unfortunately. Senator Ranker had a lot of questions. We were trying to limit him to 45 minutes, but it did get carried on to well past an hour because of the questions that came from Senator Ranker. So I thought it was a great discussion, and I think it's important for people to be exposed to that viewpoint. I don't think that there's 100% unanimity with regards to that issue of climate change. I think it's fascinating that we've cooled for the past 15 years globally, and people need to be aware of that.
Well, I think too, what you do is it's not uncommon to add work sessions in the middle of session as you have slower times and you're not hearing the bills. So you may have a topic that is just something that's been on your plate for a while, and there's a period of time in a committee hearing where you can hear the issues, so.
So we got nuclear on Thursday, if you want to come to that one.
Can you mention the MACA bill? Is that, I assume that's NTIB, I guess, and still alive? What happens with that? Is that a big priority for the caucus?
I think it's a big priority for the caucus and the people of Washington State to get these projects cleaned up. And so we'll be coming out, I think, with a great proposal that's going to fund, a lot of cleanup sites you haven't seen on the list before, and it'll be good for Washington State. So that'll be coming out next week.
Which is part of the capital budget?
It'll be part capital, part operating.
I guess how much would you oppose using MACA money for the general budget?
How do I say 100%? How do I say?
Totally. I guess would you vote against a budget that did that?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you talk about it, right? I mean, it's if you say I'm going to move a little bit of hazardous substance tax to fund a program at the Department of Ecology, which is focused on cleaning up hazardous sites, that's different than a direct transfer to the general fund. Would be my answer.
So what have you heard about the governor's budget guidelines or proposals or whatever?
So from our perspective, we know roughly what the McCleary money might be, and that he is moving towards that. I don't want to he has a press conference you guys get to hear about tomorrow. Other than that, there's just an outline floating around, nothing from the governor himself. I actually got it from other sources, so we just kind of had a peek at it. My questions I would ask would be, is there tax increases in his discussion to fund the things that he wants to fund? What does he mean about the B&O? And what impact would that have on businesses in Washington? And third, he says that right now he's still looking for willing partners on the gas tax. Did he find any? And if so, I would love to talk to them, because I think he's got a lot to carry on that. So those are the tidbits that we know about right now.
What taxes,
Huh?
what taxes do you think are most likely to be in this package?
So my understanding, it's going to be a lot of little exemptions that hurt a lot of small business and different folks like that. And he's looking at what he can do to kind of bring in different pots, and then a B&O is on the table.
Extending the surcharge on service.
Yeah.
But not the beer tax?
I think he likes beer, so I think we're okay there.
Okay. Now, playing back my tape of the Fund Education First news conference a couple of weeks ago.
Good for you.
Occasionally I do that.
Okay.
I was noticing that Gary Alexander seemed to indicate support for the hospital safety net assessment, and I just thought that I should bring that one out a little bit further. How do you guys feel about that hospital safety net assessment, and is this something that's going to be supported by folks on your side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think it's a little too early to give an answer that commits our folks. It's a matter of negotiation right now. There has been some proposals that are supported by all sides there, and if we can reach a conclusion that doesn't really, gut the ability of hospitals to continue to operate, we could support that.
Okay. So it sounds like not quite as committal as it sounded like at that last press conference.
So there are 4 big areas that still have to be worked through. We've been meeting with the Senate. It's been a very nice dialogue. And Gary's been meeting with Ross Hunter, trying to figure out what it is. You got the Bracken decision. Still a lot of work to do. The Sprint bill, got to make sure that it's a reform bill for the overall telecom problems that we're facing in all of Washington. The hospital safety net assessment, and then Medicaid reimbursement. These are probably the big questions that are out there. Each budget assumes Medicaid reimbursement, but it's how the operation of it actually functions and what the
Medicaid
money's,
expansion.
yeah, thank you, Medicaid expansion, and what those functions are used for, and what the expansion dollars can go for, cause some issues. So those are probably the big sticky wickets from our caucus's perspective of getting down to the details, and we've only touched on Medicaid expansion in our caucus discussion. We haven't even touched the other ones yet.
Okay.
We
Now,
got time.
Here's another one. If Governor Inslee is going to be coming up with his list of ideas tomorrow, I'm wondering, what sort of hopes do you guys have for his big proposals about closing tax loopholes? Do you think that's going to solve much?
So I would really like to see a budget. I mean, it all has to fit into a puzzle. Even the minority caucus has come out with budgets in the past. I mean, to put out highlights and ideas, if we all did that, we'd never get anywhere. So if you're going to say, this is what we're going to do over on this side of the ledger, I'd like to really see what you're going to do on the other side of the ledger as well.
I would like to see the list, you know, what he calls loopholes or tax incentives or tax exemptions, whatever they are. I look forward to seeing if he really has a list.
Do you think
Okay.
it could possibly account for much, though? You know,
Depends on what he does.
Yeah, it's hard to say without
mean,
knowing what's in front of
If
us.
you take the tax exemption away from wind, that would be like 80 million. Maybe he's going to do that.
I'm hoping he goes with the food tax exemption, get rid of that one.
Or maybe on prescription drugs?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
The House, you unveiled your education budget.
Right.
But you didn't unveil
It's a great
overall
question.
budget to go with it.
Yeah.
And you just criticized Governor Inslee for putting out, not putting out a full budget and saying you got to fit the big puzzle. So
Right, so we have made our balance sheet. We're waiting till the Senate puts theirs out, and we'll have our balance sheet available and can answer questions. So we're, I think, John, very credible in our response, and we put out a minority budget for the last couple of years. Last time I checked, he's the governor of the state, though, and his job is to guide and lead us. And how often do you see a budget that you can't govern with highlights. You actually need a plan. And so I'm very comfortable in the fact that right now we're far ahead of everybody on what we put on the table and what information we've been willing to share.
Medicaid expansion in the Senate, how's that going?
We have not had that full discussion in our caucus. That's an issue I've really paid attention to. My concern is whatever we do, will this program be sustainable in 5 years when we're paying 10% of the cost? And a lot of states are looking at a lot of different things, and it's all a bunch of guesses right now because we don't know. Some states are proposing, and they're working with the federal government to move their Medicaid program into the exchange and subsidize the premium so Medicaid folks can buy insurance inside the exchange. I think the real issue is, as I mentioned, the sustainability of this program long-term, because once you sign people up for a program, it's very difficult to take them off the program. And I think none of us would want to do that.
But that's been the question all along.
All along.
From the Senate Republicans, House Republicans, is it sustainable?
Right.
Don't you have an answer for that yet?
If we knew what the federal government was doing, we'd have a lot of answers, but they're
Right
very
now, the House
unpredictable.
hasn't assumed it, right?
We're not going to know.
April 30th.
We're not going to know, and also, if you recall, I sponsored 5596, the Senate bill, in 2011. It passed both chambers with 100% of the vote. It was a proposed request to the federal government to allow us some flexibility in the Medicaid program. Governor supported it. The governor went back to talk to the president, Kathleen Sebelius. We got zero help. So the reality is there has to be some flexibility given to us at the federal level, given to states, to make this program sustainable. And sooner or later, I think the federal government will recognize that. The fact that they're talking to Ohio, the Obama administration's talking to Ohio, they're talking to Arkansas, about some of this flexibility, I think is a good sign. But no matter what, when we leave Olympia, whenever the last signy day is, we still are not going to have any certainty, I think, from the federal government. So whatever it is to make the best educated guess we can make this year. Because everybody will recognize there is a bunch of money to book in the budget, and if you are, as the Senate Majority Coalition, we are going to put out a budget with no new taxes. And so you just have to look at all alternatives. And we haven't zeroed in on any of the final things, but we're getting close.
So you will book money for Medicaid
We will book
expansion?
money. I think every single caucus will.
But you don't know how much yet?
No.
Going along with that, some of that money is for mental health. DSHS is saying they need more money for the state hospital staff, and I think they're actually going over in their budget this year.
In Western, right.
And do you think that's in the works to provide more money for the state hospitals and to the mental health system in general? There are also several bills that will.
I can't speak to Western State Hospital. I can speak to the mental health system. I know in our budget we are looking at, and this is a system that is broken all across the state. In my area in particular, I'm really paying attention to this issue. And as a registered pharmacist, you know, I really have great concerns about people who have mental health issues, and I believe as a society we should be there to help them in any way. If they can get the proper guidance, medical programs, prescriptions, there is a way for them to be very productive in society, but we have to have some consistency to provide that support. Our state needs a lot of room for improvement. Our country does. And I know with the Affordable Care Act, supposedly there is more money for mental health issues, and let's hope so.
And do you expect that your budget will book some additional money for mental health?
I do.
This is for Linda too. I wanted to sort of nail you down a little bit further on when that budget is going to come out. Basically, a couple of weeks ago, Ross Hunter said that there was no possible way, if it was the House's turn, that they would ever release a budget on April 1st. So I just wanted to check and make sure that, you know, can we assume that it's going to be sometime Tuesday through Friday next week?
Well, I'm sure your mother would love April 1st if that was your birthday. But it'll be sometime next week, I would guess, and I can't tell you the day because I'm not quite sure.
So it could be Monday.
I tell you what,
I
we're
have to
having a
use
press
Senator Hart.
conference on April 1st, you come, okay?
Unless it's your birthday.
Will you book money from marijuana fees and taxes in your budget?
I haven't talked about that with Senator Hill, but I would assume no. Again, this is another case where it would be really nice if we would hear from the federal government on whether this initiative is legal and all of that. Again, as a pharmacist, you know, I cannot dispense marijuana. It is an illegal drug, but I know our governor has been back to Washington, D.C. several times on that issue, and we keep waiting to hear what the answer is. So I think that we will not be booking any money because it's premature.
You know, at this point, there's so much confusion around how that can be implemented. We do have a little bit of certainty around the fact that there's going to be extra cost involved in writing regulations and enforcing, but nobody feels any confidence in booking dollars at this point from that.
Are you feeling at all like you're running out of time? You've got 4.5 weeks, and there's not, other than former governor's budget, there's not a budget on the table at this point. An awful lot of disagreement to bridge between the House and the Senate, I would assume. How much time do you think you're going to need?
Well, I don't feel like we're running out of time, and I have to tell you, being a part of the Majority Coalition, I think it's thrilling to be organized, to not work really late, to be able to go home on weekends and be with our family and connect with those that we represent in the real world. And if we were really behind, I don't think we would have had this schedule that we've done, but we have tried to be very conscientious to families, and so I think we're doing just quite okay on time. But I do believe a budget will come out, and my guess it will be next week, but I can't zero in on the exact date.
And Brad, I would tell you that knowing that Senator Hargrove and Senator Hill and Representative Alexander are working very tightly together, and that Representative Hunter has been in these discussions as well, I actually feel like more is probably coming into a collaborative budget than we probably had in the past. Because in the past, you think about it, maybe we were a couple weeks earlier, but everybody released their own budget, and then you'd go in the sandbox and fight it out. I actually think that they're doing a lot of the ground game work for a large bipartisan budget out of the Senate that picks up both these and ours, that will make it much simpler to get that out of the House and have resolution on it. I think the governor is looking to see what they do, and I think right now the Senate coalition government's leading the state, and Senator Hill and Senator Hargrove are doing their best to write a good budget. So I actually think we're in better shape than we've been in years.
Yeah. Speaking of what
I
happens.
feel good about it. No, I feel like we're gonna actually get out on time. Yay.
Well, and one thing that I would like to point out about the whole process too is from the beginning, we've heard over and over that the Majority Coalition Caucus is going to spell gridlock in Olympia. And yet when we look at the days up to this point, things have been pretty effective. Things have worked. We've had both sides talking to each other. It hasn't been a unipartisan rule. We've had a lot of very good conversations, and we've worked through a lot of issues. And so, basically no one knows what's going to happen until the budget's on the table, but the idea of spelling defeat before we've even had anything on the table, I think that's happened all year, and thus far the Majority Coalition Caucus has come through pretty well on it.
Senator Smith, since you're here, I guess I should ask, is the budget, do you expect the budget to book more new money for parks, for state parks?
Well, we're at the 100-year anniversary for state parks this year. And in all of the conversations I've had, we have no intention of closing all of our state parks this year to celebrate the anniversary. We want to make sure that we have a sustainable program, but when it comes down to it, I think when we look at every system, there's an Olympia and even a West Side mantra that the way to solve all of our problems is to spend more money. When in actuality, I think those of us who live in the real world know that often the problem isn't the lack of money, it's the lack of efficiency within the system. And one thing that I'm very encouraged about when we talk with the Parks Department is that they are looking at some really good fundamental business changes to the way that the department works and the way that they generate revenue. And my hat is off to them for that, and I've been glad to work with them. So, all of the conversations we've had about parks the parks are here, and they're going to stay, and we're going to make sure they remain open. And well, I think what you just heard me say is we need to develop a system that works. And I think when you look at the revenue for the state as a whole, we had a 7% revenue increase. And so as we start talking about what we do moving forward, I think generally that tells us that there's room for expansion within the budget. Now, I think the other thing that is obvious is when we look at reality, nobody is going to get what they want. Because we had $38 billion, $38 billion in tax increases proposed by the minority party in the Senate. That's more than doubling the state budget. So we're not going to be able to accommodate all of the asks that are put forward, but we do recognize that the state has some priorities, and there are some important programs that will be addressed, that will be funded, and will be cared for.
When looking at things that work, would you say the Discover Pass, which was designed to put some money into the park system so that the general fund didn't have to put some money in. Is that system working?
Great question. And actually, I think if you would talk with a lot of the users, there are some major challenges there. And so when it comes to the Discover Pass, one of the biggest things that we've been focusing on is if we're going to utilize that system, we need to refine it, we need to improve it, we need to remodel it, we need to design it for success instead of something that we kind of put together at the last minute to try to make things work.
Is part of that solution that you like and what they're considering, and what they might do for financial solutions, is part of that involved sort of inviting vendors into the park, having more kinds of private businesses operating in the park?
Well, I don't want to take the thunder of the people in the Parks Department that have been working really hard in order to bring together their plan. I can tell you we have talked with them. I am familiar with the details, and I like some of the changes that they're proposing.
I wanted to get back to what's going to happen at the end of the session. You guys were just talking about the budget. But I was also thinking, could it be that perhaps we're seeing an unusual number of issues, policy issues that are being reserved for the end game negotiations too? I just wonder if basically it's all going to be just a sort of a big gloppy mess that's unusual.
So no different. I mean, last year we waited till the last minute to do workers' comp. Linda and I were in there. We waited last minute to UI, we waited last minute to do the tax stuff,
The health insurance.
health insurance. So it's no different. We always create a bow wave of issues to finish the session with. Last question.
Yeah.
Got
Sorry.
sort of a totally different issue. I was at the public hearing yesterday on Representative Peterson's memorial to call for, ask Congress to have a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United via a constitutional amendment. I noticed that the House Republicans mostly voted against it. What do the Senate Republicans think about that memorial, and why did the House Republicans vote against it?
I have to be honest, I wasn't paying attention to that, so you'll have to.
So
I think we're focusing on a budget right now.
what he's asking Congress to do is basically say that if you are a corporation, you're not a citizen, okay? And what he's also saying in this is if you make a movie as a citizen that's a political documentary, like Michael Moore or other so noted documentary people made by a corporation, which I assume that any movie that you make is made by a corporation, cannot be released within, the Supreme Court said, 60 days of an election. I think Jamie Peterson wants to control speech, and I think at some point in his life, Michael Moore must have made him mad, because he doesn't like, obviously, these mockumentary political films that are made. And what he's telling Congress to do is to take away the rights of companies and small businesses and citizens in the United States, and Washington State should take the lead in supporting that.
Okay, but I think it was interesting things like, $1 million from out-of-state things, PACs donating $1 million plus to various causes, and they were pointing out both liberals and conservatives.
But the main impetus is around how that money is spent, and if it's political speech or not, that you can make a film and release it close to an election. And so if you give $1 million, George Soros gives $1 million to Michael Moore to create Fahrenheit 9/11, you can't release that within 60 days of an election.
So really quick, is that bill in TIB?
No.
It's a memorial.
It's a
We'll
memorial.
probably deal with it next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're focused on the budget,
You know,
and
there's-
that's the focus, and we're not gonna get distracted by those kinds of bills, and we're gonna get a
that.
budget that doesn't raise taxes and funds priorities, and not let people throw roadblocks in the way that just takes us away from our core mission.
Yeah, you'll remember we started out with jobs, the education, and then a sustainable budget. And we talked about the first two, and now we're getting close to the budget that we're trying to put out. So we've been very focused, and we have to. We have a diverse caucus, just like every caucus is diverse. We all signed the principles at the beginning, 25 members, and we're focused on those three items.
Is there any talk of going home if you pass that budget and the House is insisting, House Democrats are insisting on, and perhaps the governor on some revenue?
I don't have to stay, do I?
It's always a good option.
All right. Thank you, guys.